Welcome to Connect Canyons, a podcast sponsored by Canyon School District. This is a show about what we teach, how we teach, and why. We get up close and personal with some of the people who make our schools great. Students, teachers, principals, parents, and more. We meet national experts too. Learning is about making connections. So connect with us.
Hello, thanks for tuning in to Connect Canyons. My name is Jody Ginnessy. I'm a communications specialist with Canyon School District, and I'm pleased to be the host of this episode. I'm joined in the studio today by Canyons District Teacher Specialist Leslie Morris. In this episode, we're going to be delving into news literacy. First off, thanks for being here, Leslie. Could you please give us an overview of your position here at Canyons and kind of the path that led you here?
Sure, definitely. Thanks for having me. So I am currently the high school ELA specialist in the Instructional Supports Department. And so I support all of our high school ELA teachers, and I also work with all of the reading intervention classes. We call it secondary literacy. And I was a coach here in the district before coming into this position, and I was over at Hillcrest, Diamond Ridge, and C-Tech. And prior to that, I taught all sorts of high school English subjects. And then I think on top of that, the reason why you asked me to come in today is I'm the ambassador for the state of Utah for the News Literacy Project. I work with a nonprofit organization to share news literacy resources for teachers and the public.
Well, perfect timing, too, because News Literacy Week is January 23rd through the 27th. So that's exciting times for the ambassador here. Huh?
Yeah, exciting, busy. Free press is one of the main principles of the News Literacy Project. It's promoting free press and ensuring a free press, and that it's a key component of democracy.
Yeah, and there's a funny meme with a photo of Abraham Lincoln that attributes this quote to him. It says, "Don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it."
Love that. Our students need to know that too.
The internet was not around when Abraham Lincoln was around, so don't believe everything on the internet, despite what you might see. There's never been more information and more misinformation in the history of humanity. It's just so much is out there with the internet. It's kind of the wild, wild west. And so even while somebody might be yelling fake news or tweeting fake news, you don't know for sure whether they're just trying to keep you away from the actual news or they are being genuine. We wanted to delve into this topic about news literacy. And if you could just kind of explain what news literacy is first off, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. And I have some interesting statistics for you about misinformation. So let's come back to that later.
Okay.
So the News Literacy Project is a nonpartisan nonprofit organization, and their mission is to provide lessons and resources for teachers for teaching news literacy to students. And they have a public outreach program as well, because in order to be full participants in democracy and civic life, you need to be able to tell fact from fiction, and that will help influence the decisions that you make as a citizen.
And why is that so important?
It's really important to teach news, media, and information literacy, because that is, as you said before, how most of our students are getting their information now. I mean, 95% of the world has internet. Not even that amount of people in the world have clean running water, but we're spreading and sharing information globally now. And it's no longer someone that you know or a trusted news anchor that you're getting your news from. It could be anybody on the internet, anybody sitting at home, and they're really sophisticated with the way that they share news and information online. So we really need to teach the skills so students can really determine what's truth and what's false.
Yeah, it's hard because I have 4 kids, ages 10 through 18, and they're not going to legitimate news sites to get news. If they happen to have news fall upon their ears or their eyes, it's through social media. It's generally from TikTok or Instagram. They don't have Facebook, but maybe Twitter. And so And it's coming from not people who necessarily are trustworthy. Perhaps they are, but it's coming from people they trust because they like their content that they're providing them.
Right. And it creates an echo chamber. So you will only hear what you already agree with, and then it's reinforcing your own it's confirmation bias in its pure form, I feel like. And we see that with elections, and we see it with, I think politics kind of are those hot button issues. We see it with the environment. We see it in education, where they only hear what they already believe and what they agree with, and so they never hear another side. They never consider another opinion, and they certainly don't hear all the facts when they're only gathering news within echo chambers.
It kind of reminds me in the Iraq War, there was the Minister of Information, and people here in the West jokingly called him Baghdad Bob, which I can't remember his full name. I apologize. But he would be on television on the Iraqi news stations and whatnot, and he would be promoting the idea that the Americans aren't here. And I remember there were parodies where tanks were rolling behind him, and he's like, the Americans aren't here. We're destroying them. And he was giving just flat out lies, and it was almost to the point where it was comical. Not to make light of a situation such as war, but it kind of was a very extreme example of somebody who's giving their spin on just absolute false news, and when you could see what was really going on behind them, or if you looked at the broader picture.
I think we need to remember all of these social media companies, and even I would say online newspapers to a certain extent, they now make their money based on the number of clicks that they receive and headlines, right? And so you have to think about what their motivation is. And for Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, whatever it is, it's to keep you on the site, to keep you happy, to keep you clicking, engaging, liking, commenting. And so it's interesting. All of these companies do advertising, and they will run like A/B testing on their own news articles or on their own web, like blog posts or whatever it is, where they will change the headline to get more clickbait, to get more interaction, because the more interaction you have, the more people who will see it, and then you can get more money in advertising. And so there really is a corporate structure behind how we get news now. And even what I would consider legitimate news organizations have to have ad revenue. And so it's something that we need to be aware of and teach students to look for those kind of emotional triggers that lead them to interact with something online.
I looked at the News Literacy Project, at the pamphlet, and searched around their website a little bit before we did this podcast. And I'm like, it didn't take me long to be excited about what they're doing, because I know just it's a huge challenge. And as the ambassador for Utah, I'm sure you are more aware of it than anybody. But
and it's interesting. They started in 2008, but there's been pushback. And it isn't until the last few years when a lot of states started instituting laws, like the state of Utah has a law around information literacy, that they've started to get a lot of support from public education. And I think that's really interesting. So they are expanding quickly in light of these recent years. I would say the last 5 or 6 years.
The pandemic seemed to kind of light the powder keg as well. I mean, there's so much information and misinformation, and we're not going to delve into what's true and false and opinion and news with any particular topic, but it's really easy to be misled or swayed one way or the other depending on whom you trust. I like this part from the mission of the News Literacy Project. It says they aim to create better informed, more engaged, and more empowered individuals and a stronger democracy through improved news literacy. I really enjoyed that. And
we keep hearing, like, kids today are digital natives. they understand this. They know these things, but they struggle just as much as we do. I won't date myself or age myself here, but I will tell you I didn't have email when I went to college. So they struggle just as much as anybody else with identifying false information online. And I think they're kind of more susceptible to it because they're exposed to so much more of it than maybe somebody who isn't on TikTok as much. So
how does this all tie into our district vision?
The vision statement says that we're dedicated to delivering a high quality education and that we want learners to be prepared for meaningful life opportunities. And I think part of that high quality education is teaching students how to think. And that's one thing I really appreciate about the News Literacy Project is that it is not, here's what to think, here's a really good source, or here's a news organization we can trust. They teach students how to determine those things for themselves, how to analyze sources. And then we want to prepare them for a meaningful life, which means we want them to be involved in their communities, to be involved, hopefully, in public government. I would love to see some of our students run for school board in 20, 30 years and really be actively engaged in creating a better world. And to do that, you need to have accurate and truthful information behind those decisions.
So how do you help teachers help the students learn how?
There are so many resources, and they are constantly growing. So they have an educational team that is continually creating as we give them feedback as ambassadors after our events of what teachers really need and what are looking for. So one of their biggest platforms is Checkology. And within it, it has multiple sort of divisions. One of the main parts of Checkology is it's an interactive learning management system where you can assign lessons on news and information literacy to your students. They watch lessons. You can do them individually or as a whole class. There are activities, quizzes, follow-up, real-world examples, all teaching various topics. So a teacher could go in and assign an entire course, like if you were teaching like a journalism class here in the high schools, or they could go in and just look at evaluating sources. And maybe that's something that an ELA or social studies teacher does as they're teaching research papers. And so they have everything a teacher would need without them having to create it themselves. And they include experts in the field of journalism. And they tie in freedom of speech and democracy and civics to try to help students see that there's a broader reason for analyzing your sources than for your research paper in the 11th grade. So, but they also have quick tools. They have information sheets, handouts. They have this great tool that I love. I think that it's just called a source checker, but basically it walks the student through and they type up what claim they found in an article or a blog or something online, and it will ask them questions that the student will then have to think about. Like it'll say, is this claim made on a website with advertising? And the student will say yes or no. Does this come from a credible news source? Is the writer a published writer that you can find other works on? Can you find something confirming or not confirming this on another reputable site? And so I recently in December did one of our bite-sized PDs, kind of introducing everything that the News Literacy Project has. So if people are really interested, they can go to our Canyons U page and check that out. But I went through an example of a false claim that was kind of going around that Disneyland was going to tear down Cinderella's castle. And and I did that example live. And at the end, it will tell you, this is probably a credible source, this is not a credible source, or you need to do more research. And it teaches students the questions that they should be asking when looking at, is something credible? And I like that process because they're basically teaching lateral reading in a step-by-step format.
Oh, that's really interesting. I appreciate all of that. For most of my career as a sports writer, The same rules apply to sports as they do news, though, as far as disseminating facts and information. But often people's opinions would kind of be mixed in there, and it made it kind of difficult sometimes because people would report. I remember one time I had to chase down a rumor that the Jazz were going to trade a certain person, and when I followed the trail of where this rumor came from, and it originated from a blog post that one of the other newspapers had written. And it was a good blog post, but it was kind of some speculative, hey, if I were the Jazz, they need this and this on their team, so maybe they should look towards trading this person for this person. So it was just kind of like some ideas. It's kind of like that game where you whisper to the person sitting next to you, the telegram game, and by the time you get down to the other side of the couch, like, the message is completely different, and that happens all the time on the internet. And so,
yes, and though if you're passionate about a subject, you're actually more likely to fall for misinformation or disinformation, and because you care so much, so you are triggered more emotionally by it and will engage with it more than someone who could care less. If somebody who did not like Disney at all, had never been to Disneyland, they probably would read that and go, okay, whatever, and scroll on by.
Yeah.
So another tool the News Literacy Project has just started it's called Rumor Guard. And it's where they take a rumor from the internet and they'll pull an actual social media post and analyze it and see if it's credible or not. And I love it because they don't just say this is false or this is true. They go through those guiding questions. So they have 5 questions, and I just think these are really good questions to ask, I think, for all of us. So has this been posted by a credible source? Is there evidence that proves this claim? Is the context accurate? That is so key. I keep thinking about this. Prince Harry released his memoir, right? And I love British royalty. I mean, I teach English, I just love all of that. So I keep seeing it coming up on my social media, and people are taking clips of what he's saying out of context. And you need context to make a decision if something's credible. And too often on the internet, you get a 15-second clip, a screenshot, right? And not the whole picture. So I love that that's one of the things that they ask about. The 4th question is it based on solid reasoning? So when we're talking about really teaching our students reasoning skills, that's a deep skill to teach. And the last one, is it authentic? So they actually will teach students how to do a reverse image search or to see if something has been doctored or edited. And unfortunately, people are getting really good at making things look legitimate.
That's one of the really scary parts about this with the new Chat GPT, the AI that will can write up any crazy thing that you want it to, and then they can put your image onto somebody else's. Like they can make Tom Cruise look like Harrison Ford or whatever.
Yes, and
it's more important than ever for people to have these tools to be able to disseminate, fact from fiction. It's going to be harder and harder. So, yeah, we really need to stay ahead of this.
Yeah, and so we have an information literacy team in the instructional supports department, and Jody Ide and Gretchen Zaitsev are leads of that team, and they wrote a grant. It's the Local Innovations in Civic Teaching grant from the state of Utah. And with that, we have a 3-year professional development plan. We're calling it Information Investigators, but it is 8 sessions each year, and teachers learn how to teach about misinformation and information literacy. And we talk about all of those things, right? And give teachers tools for how to teach these things in their classroom. So we're about 5 sessions in, and the response has been great. This first year, we're just doing high school ELA and social studies. Next year, we'll break out to all secondary teachers. And then the 3rd year, we're going to focus on elementary.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. So we start young. And one of the things that we keep bringing up in the training and teachers keep bringing up is every time they read something and they have an emotional response, we should stop and question that. And so that's something, that impulse to immediately respond is like the first line of defense for not falling victim to misinformation. So stop, think, pause, and then get curious. So we're not being critical, we're getting curious. We want to know, well, tell me more. Where did you read that? What did that really say? Let me click through and read the whole article and not just the headline. And really get curious about what you read that caused you to have any sort of emotional reaction. Even if it's positive, even if it's like, yes, I agree. Like.
Share. The dangerous one is share.
The dangerous one is share.
No, so I like that. So stop yourself, kind of challenge and look into it.
Stop that cycle, because most misinformation is shared immediately.
Just impulsively. I mean, it's really tempting to see some salacious news or interesting news or whatnot. And, maybe you see like a post about like a ghost or something, and it turns out that it's actually like some little bug on the camera screen. You said you had some statistics for us. What are those about?
We share these in almost every presentation, and just every time I'm surprised. These statistics come from polls from 2018 and 2020, so, beginning of pandemic for 2020. But 59% of Americans say that they have a hard time identifying false information. I mean, that's basically 60%.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. And then 63% of people worldwide agree that the average person can't tell good journalism from rumors or falsehoods. And I just think about the attacks that have happened on the journalism and free press in this country, and it's scary. There's definitely a doubt that people have towards the news and towards journalism. And I think that leads to, or a contributing factor is that they can't tell what's true and what's false. I have friends who have gone on to Good Day Utah and done a news segment, but it really was an extended advertisement for their business. And so one of the statistics is that 68% of people can't tell the difference between news and sponsored content. And, if we're going to follow the money, whenever there's sponsored content, there's a reason. Like, they have their own agenda. And then we have news, like talk shows or news commentary shows, and where they're talking about politics or they're talking about what's happening in the world, but it's 100% opinion-based. And there are even news shows where they have, like, people on both sides of the political aisle commenting on a topic. And I think it's important to know that that's not news, right? It's not news, it's opinion. And I don't know that everybody can distinguish, because we have so many different ways that we're getting, quote unquote, information now.
It goes back to those 5 questions to kind of determine whether it's news or opinion or conjecture.
Yeah. And like I said before, stopping and getting curious. Maybe it's because I taught English and we analyze literature, but what is the author really trying to say to me? Because there's always a message, there's always a theme, there's always an underlining tone. So what is that? And often as our students get into high school, they'll do rhetorical analysis, and they'll really start looking at the moves that writers and speakers are making. And I think it's a skill that we should transfer into our everyday world. I will say, like, as you practice news and information literacy, you get better at it. Well, you get better at asking questions, because in our department now, someone will share something, and it's not uncommon for someone on our information literacy team to say, well, where did you hear that?
That's good.
Right? because we want to know more, because we've started to try to practice ourselves that stopping the emotional trigger and really thinking about what was just said or what was just shared.
That reminds me of the old quote about how journalists wouldn't trust their mother if she says she loved them until they had a second and third source to confirm.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's very valid, and not with your mother. Your mom loves you,
Right.
but in the sense you want to know where that source, where that news came from, and make sure that it's coming from a trustworthy source.
Yes,
so.
and it's interesting when we talk about like web design. Man, some of these websites look like legitimate news organizations.
Yeah.
I was contacted by an English teacher about a source that a student had used in class. And she basically wanted, like, how would you address this? I don't think this is a valid source. And so I went through a lateral reading of the source. And one of the first things they do is they tell you to get off the website and find another source about that website. What can you learn about that website? And so one of the examples that the News Literacy Project will show often in their PowerPoints is the text about climate change. And it's interesting because when they show it to students, like 96% of students think that it's a true claim, but they don't look at where, like, the context of it. And it's on a website all about, it's a website sponsored by the fossil fuel industry. So it's a claim that says that climate change isn't real, right? But if you don't know the context, if you don't know the site, if you're not kind of figuring out who owns the site, who pays for the site, it's really hard to determine if it's a valid source or not. So, and that takes time, right?
Right.
It's hard to always open up a window and start researching about companies. So,
Well, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor and an honorable effort here that you and others are making to try to help us all become more news literate. Okay. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I would challenge everyone to go home and do an experiment.
Oh, please tell me it has to do with like baking soda and red food dye. I'm sorry.
Sorry, no. Gretchen Zaitsev is the one who showed this to me, and it's incredible. So if you go home and you Google vice president and then click on images, you will see pictures of a certain person, right? Then open up a new window and go to Bing and Google vice president and click on images and see who most of those pictures are. I think you'll be surprised that on two different search engines, the pictures are very different.
The information gatekeepers kind of have different ways,
agendas,
different agendas and different ways to present.
Yeah, and you can go in and find out who owns Bing and who funds that search program. And it was really interesting to me because I think we inherently trust our internet search, but we shouldn't. They are also run by an algorithm.
Right.
And they also make money off of ads. And they make money off sponsored content. Like if the first link is sponsored, they make money if you click on it. It's a pretty widespread phenomenon. And so that means it's an essential skill we need to teach our students.
Let's just tear down the whole internet and just go back to newspapers or maybe stone tablets.
No, I do not like the card catalog. That was awful.
Yeah, the Dewey Decimal System was, Sorry, Gretchen.
I know, but that card catalog, I mean, it was like miraculous.
Leslie, thank you so much. We appreciate your efforts in improving our news literacy, and we appreciate the efforts of teachers and of students for taking the opportunity to question where truth and fact and fiction and opinion come from.
Yeah, and the goal is always to find truth. That's the goal.
It's a worthwhile and honorable goal.
In our district, we're really focusing on information investigators for teachers. People can check out the Bite Size PD. And for our digital teaching and learning summit that we do in June for all of our teachers, the information investigators team is planning on doing presentations, and I'll be doing presentations specifically on Checkology and rumor guard and those sorts of things too.
I might have to sneak in because that sounds really fascinating.
Well, it's really cool. And if for our community members, our parents, our district office staff, maybe we have some secret fans out there in the world. You can also go to News Literacy Project, and they have a tab for parents, or for, I think it says community. They have resources, not just for teachers, even though that's their main focus.
Great. Well, thanks again, Leslie, and thank you to our friends who are listening out there. We always appreciate you tuning in. Let's connect again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Connect Canyons. Connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at Canyons District, or on our website, canyonsdistrict.org.